Father Vogel. We're beginning this series on St. Francis de Sales' Introduction to the Devout Life. As we're going to go through this book, especially to glean a lot of St. Francis's insights into how to grow in devotion and love of God through the course of our life. The book begins with a preface wherein Francis will explain why he has written this book. And it really wasn't a book necessarily that he at first was going to write, but at this time, Francis de Sales was the Bishop of Geneva in Switzerland, where he's from. And he took upon himself at various times the spiritual direction of different individuals. And after specifically one lady that he was assisting, the advice that he had given to her and written down began to be discovered by others who encouraged him to write it down in a book. And so he ended up doing that as well. One of the big motivating factors for him to do so was that he saw that many spiritual writings were focused mainly on an audience for those that were in the religious life. Nuns, monks, but he wanted something available for the ordinary person. Because he was convinced that it wasn't just those that are priests or religious that can be holy, but that every single person is called to holiness. In fact, this is something that was really taken up by the entire church, especially at the time of the Second Vatican Council. So they came to be called the universal call to holiness. And so way before his time, back in the 1500s, St. Francis de Sales was already thinking very much in this way, and so produced this introduction to the devout life for the normal person. So in the course of his book, he speaks to us under the name of Philothea, which means one who loves God. So it's for anyone who loves God. One of the things I love about de Sales' writings is that he uses so many analogies or images to help explain, oftentimes difficult spiritual concepts. He brings in things that we experience within the world in order to understand it. Of course, he didn't come up with this. This is something that Jesus, of course, did through the use of his parables and different images that he had. And so right here at the beginning, he uses one of the first images that he has is that of a bouquet of flowers. He says, he's not coming up with something new himself, though we could argue that his insights are very profound. I mean, he has been declared a doctor of the church after all. But he's saying that he's just picking up on what things have already been passed down, the flowers that are part of our church through the centuries, but that he's just arranging it in a different bouquet. And so this bouquet is specifically one for the ordinary person. So he explains that there's going to be 5 main parts to this book. And so the first part, he explains, is that of certain advice or exercises to help us really begin to move from an initial desire to enter into the devout life to a firm commitment to live it out each day. Then under part 2, he's going to go into the 2 main means by which we can be united more deeply with God. And that's the sacraments and prayer. The third part of his book, he wants to look at the practice of different virtues. And he's going to give wonderful advice on how to grow certain virtues and keep away from the vices. In fact, that's really the focus of the fourth part, is what are those snares that the enemy wants to try to trap us in, and how do we avoid them? And finally, the fifth part, he's going to teach us how to, within the course of our lives, which often become very busy, how to withdraw and refresh ourselves so that we can have renewed energy for living a life of devotion toward God. He writes this book too as a bishop because he says, this is one of the main tasks that a bishop has. One of the main things God has given the bishop is to help people reach perfection, help them reach God. And I'd have to agree with him. As a priest, that's one of my main things that I need to do as well. So that's why I'm, making these reflections based off his work so that I can share the riches that I've received and continue to receive from St. Francis de Sales and his introduction to the devout life. One of the best lines in this first part comes next, where St. Francis de Sales says that it is true that I am writing about the devout life without myself being devout. Such humility on his part, though he is much more devout, even at this point, than any of us are. But I am writing about the devout life without myself being devout. See, he knew that he was not yet complete. He hadn't reached perfection in holiness. But he wanted to share that which he had come to understand this so far, so that we too could begin that journey. And for himself, he says that, I know that by teaching it to others, I myself may also grow in it as well. So I have to agree with him. I'm giving these reflections not because I myself am devout or anywhere near the holiness of St. Francis de Sales, but because through teaching it to you, I myself hopefully can also grow in greater love and devotion of the Lord. So through the course of these reflections, I'll be doing some on the road, some when I'm stopped at different places on vacation. I have my book here, Introduction to the Devout Life, kind of an old ragged copy, but we'll use that to read from, and while I'm on the road, of course, I'm listening to the audio version of it. So that concludes the preface to this book, and we'll continue on with the first chapter and the first part.